Marketer of the Day, number 483. Connect the dots, master podcasting, and make bold, creative decisions with David Ralph. Hey everyone, we're so glad that you're listening today. We're having a conversation with David Ralph, and he's a very excellent podcaster, and his website is joinupdots.com. One of his favorite quotes is the thing from Steve Jobs where he says, you can't connect the dots going forward. You can only take action, look back at what you've done, and connect the dots afterwards. So he's going to be telling us about his entrepreneurial style, about his hugely successful podcast, things like what makes an amazing interview, what you need to know as an entrepreneur, and so much more. So how are things today, Mr. David?
Oh, it's lovely to be here, sir. You've got the most remarkable hair I've ever seen on Skype. And so I'm in awe of you already. Anyone who can make their hair do that, they're a legend in my eyes.
Well, thanks for the compliment. You're making me blush. I mean, if you have the assets, you got to make the hair do its thing, right?
Absolutely. Make it while you've got it.
Yep, yeah, while you're still young and before it starts to creep back on you and all that stuff. So I mean, I'm super curious. I mean, tell me about yourself, your website, what you got going on, what has you excited these days?
Well, podcasting is my thing, and this is, funnily enough, it's got me excited more now. I've been doing it for 4 years. We launched back in April the 30th, 2014. And for anybody that's been in the entrepreneurial venture, you will have a big burst of excitement at the beginning, and then it goes through like a plateau of, is life should be better than this. I thought it was going to be greater. It just seems like a slog. But then you start to find your swing, and you realize that it's not about doing everything. It's about doing the right things. And so now with my podcasting, I'm really focused on how much can I strip away to give me the life I want. And I know this is one of your things, Robert, but how can you sort of take everything away that's not needed just to hit that sweet spot so that you can have a life and enjoy yourself. And so that's it, really. It's podcasting is my thing all the way, but I keep on getting dragged into sort of spin-offs, which I have to remain focused and not sort of look at too many of them.
Right, and I'm completely with you. I'm complete in agreement with you there. Kaizen, isn't that what it's called? It's like stripping away the unneeded stuff. And I had this friend who lived in Las Vegas who owned some gyms, and there were these weird gyms where people would show up and they'd be at the gym for like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then go home. And it's like, that's craziness, but like sort of like what you're talking about of trying different things and stripping away what's unneeded. And it seems like what you're alluding to a little bit there are like those entrepreneurial cycles, right? Like we get in, we're super excited. We're like, oh, things are just going to keep going up and up and up in a straight line. And we try different things. And there's like that middle ground. And then maybe you settle on a handful of things that work and you run with that, but that doesn't always work forever. And then it seems like there's always a need to kind of have the growth and the contraction and have that element of chaos and try different things to see what's working and what's not. Because especially like the way that the internet changes and podcasting changes, what works 5-10 years ago doesn't work. So it seems like we have to always be on the move, which is a weird attitude to have, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think for most people, you get bogged down on your journey. And I hate using that phrase, the journey, but it's kind of true as well. But you kind of get bogged down by comparing yourself to everybody else. And you're on Facebook and you're looking at this person doing that and this person doing whatever and stuff. And certainly with myself at Join Up Dots, I've had a big focus from about June last year of separating myself from literally all social media. So I live in a bubble. As Katy Perry said, I'm comfortable living in a bubble. And it's a real interesting place because you don't have any pressures as such because you're just doing what you think is right. And I liken it to the being on an island where you wake up in the morning and you have to catch your fish, and then you go and do that, and then that gives you lunchtime, and then you go to bed in the evening and you do it again. And there's no external pressures. You're just doing what's right for you. And that's really where I am at the moment, looking at everything but not looking at anybody else. I've kind of gone into a cave and pulled the shutters down.
I like that attitude a lot, where you're not keeping up with the Joneses, you're not keeping up with everyone else's sort of facades there. And do you think there's any downside to that? Like, do you think maybe there's a possibility of getting too comfortable or resting on your laurels, that kind of thing?
I think it's possible if you are somebody that rests, but I'm somebody that I'm always looking at doing new ways. And to be honest, there's three metrics that I have. I used to focus in on my downloads. That was the big thing. But now I don't really look at the downloads at all. They don't interest me. But what interests me is how many people get on my list, how many people actually connect with me, and how much money I'm making at the end of the month. And that is my own personal metric. And they're the kind of things that you can't compare with other people. It's very rare that people actually show you their bank accounts and their bank statements. I know some of the guys out there do these kind of income statements, but what you're generally comparing on is the super sexy stuff that they just happen to be doing and pushing it onto Facebook, whatever. And so, yeah, I think I am in a competition with myself. I'm in a category of myself. I'm trying to make as much money as possible, but have as much fun as possible and have as much free time as possible. So I run a really sort of kind of successful podcast now, and I only do it on 3 days a month. Everything else, I barely turn the microphone on.
Well, that's great. So you're playing by your own rules, doing your own thing, and I'm excited to jump in about the details about your podcast and what makes it unique. But before we get into that, one thing that kind of I don't know, like I'm kind of curious about is, do you have any secrets or techniques to keep yourself motivated? Because it sounds like you're a high energy guy, kind of like me, and it seems like you don't need that external motivation. So what the heck drives you?
The problem is not the driving, the problem is the stopping. That's what I've always found. You know, I'm always looking at something else. And so I've had to make a conscious decision, because being totally open with you, Robert, I had burnout twice, and I didn't understand what burnout was. I just thought I was a bit emotional. I thought I was a bit tired. But since I've been speaking to people, I can see that it's happened twice. And so I'm very aware of when I'm pushing myself too hard. And so now it's about being focused on not being motivated and driven. It's about actually slowing myself down and having more time with the kids, having more free time, maybe just watching a film on Netflix in the afternoon, where when I started this, it would be, no, that's a waste of time. I need that. But now I realize it's very important to actually not turn on your laptop or anything. So I actually have no mobile devices. I have no phones. I have no cell phones or anything. So when I come up to my recording studio to do my work, I then close it off, lock the door, and I don't get a notification, a beep or anything, because no one can get hold of me. And so that's how I've structured it, being very aware of it. It's not about me being motivated. It's about me slowing down.
And that's great. And it sounds like that gives you a lot of focus very easily, sort of like, you know, when you're at the movies and you have to power your phone off, and for those 2 hours, you're just completely focused on what's in front of you. And then you come out of it in a completely different state of mind and usually refreshed there. So great. So you don't have those distractions. You're not always running around and being fast paced. You take the time out for what's important. And so, what would you even say that burnout is? Because burnout's one of those things that is kind of like thrown around, but I don't think I've ever like put it into words or like asked myself, like, when people say burnout, what does it actually mean? So, what's burnout to you, and like, how do you know when you're getting too close to it?
Well, I actually did an episode recently of beating burnout, when I think it was my most confessional episode I ever done. But basically, there was 2 stages of it. Number one, people were saying to me, David, you look terrible. You look dreadful. You know, what are you doing to yourself? And I just felt like if anybody said anything nasty, I was going to cry. Now, I'm a 47-year-old man growing up in the United Kingdom. I'm not known to crying. We kind of suppress our emotions, really, unless we're watching Toy Story 3, and that always gets me. But it was just that feeling of being unstable. That was the first bit. And when I look back on that, I think that wasn't me. That's not how I operate. So why was I feeling like that? And then my hair started dropping out, which was a panic. But people said to me, oh, you should have lost your hair by now anyway. But I was thinking, no, this is happening really quickly. So I went to the doctors, and the doctor said to me, look, you've got to be on tablets, you've got to be on this, and you've got to be on that. And I said, no, I just sort it out myself. I just get my focus back and do that. But then I came back, and instead of doing that, I started to work harder. And I thought to myself, if I really throw myself into it, I will sort of break the back of where I was on the curve, and then get into a lovely land where I could just sort of float around. And that was the second stage, where literally it didn't really get to suicidal thoughts, but I did get to a point where I was thinking, everybody hates me, nobody likes me, what's the point in doing this? I'm just pressurizing myself. And once again, it was just not me. I'm just sort of totally motivated and positive and quite bouncy all the time. So I would say to anybody, if you're feeling in a way that you can't really pinpoint, more often than not, it's because your body's saying you've had enough. And it might be a situation at work, it might be a situation in the office, it might be whatever you're doing. But if you're starting to think, hang on, I feel a bit strange here, and this is really against type, then look at yourself. And that's what I did, Robert. I looked at myself closely and got things back into focus again.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that you're pushing your body too hard. You were kind of spread too thin, doing too much, and your initial thought was, I just need to double down, and doing double of what isn't working is just going to make the problem twice as bad, right?
Yeah, it's madness. Looking back on it, I think to myself, why the hell did I think this? And I thought it because I wasn't right at that time, Now I say to people, just step back and walk away from it. And I actually went off to the Caribbean for a couple of weeks. My daughter was getting married out there, and I didn't have any connectivity. We had no Wi-Fi or whatever. And I realized that I'd been on that treadmill. I'd been used to running, being constantly on the go all the time. And when I was just coming out of sleep, I'd start to sort of churn, think, right, let's get going, let's do this, let's do that. And that was another thing that I've had to sort of slow myself down and train myself to actually, if I don't fancy doing work, then leave it, because the quality of the work's better when you come back to it. And that's certainly been the message that I put through from my show, Join Up Dots, and my other sort of spin-offs, that you can be successful and have a life. You can potentially make more money by doing less work. But you've got to sort of almost break that training that you've had for many, many years, generations of, it's a hard day's night. You go and do a hard day's work. In the entrepreneurial world, it should all be about providing the best service for the customer, but leaving it so that it's scalable to give you free time.
I love that message. And I can definitely relate, especially from the maybe late teenager years, the early college, university years, where I would stay up all night doing things at the last minute. And I had that exact same feeling. I thought that, geez, I'm really working my tail off here. Don't I deserve an award for that? And it's like, no, you don't. And when you put in 12-hour days, you do all-nighters, then you're even like play tricks on your own brain, and you think that you're getting all this stuff done when really you're just like, you're working at a snail's pace. You're just putting in all these long hours, making yourself miserable, causing these health issues that you're mentioning. So, seems like a recipe for disaster, but a hard lesson to learn, or a hard thing to realize when you're in it. But maybe, looking backwards to get that perspective, we can definitely see how absurd that is. And you mentioned a couple of times now your podcast called Join Up Dots. So Can you unpack that a little bit for us, and maybe like tell us what makes that stand out?
Well, one of the things that makes it stand out is it's based around a theme, and I kind of fluked it right at the very beginning. I was looking for something to hook onto a podcast and have a message behind it, and I got given that speech that Steve Jobs, that you referenced at the beginning, said back in 2005, when he said you can only see how you got to somewhere when you look back and you connect the dots. I called mine Join Up Dots. And from the very first episode, when I played that speech, the show took off on a different life. And the guest went, I know that speech. I listen to it all the time, or that's exactly as my life is. And the powerful thing about it, Robert, is as I've been talking about my story there, you realize that all the crappy times in your life, all the dark dots, as we call them, when you get far enough away from them, they're actually the good. They're the gold. You can't see it at the time, but that's when you're learning. That's when you're pivoting. That's when you're strengthening your muscles at the hard times. And the good dots, you just kind of float around and you're having a lovely time and everything seems good. And that seems to be a truth that has come through everyone. And so the show has got laughs in it. It's got tears in it. It's got emotion. It's a real sort of smorgasbord. And we never know what the episode's going to produce. But I know that it's going to be a good one because it's linked around a mission. And I think all podcasts should have a mission behind them.
I love it, and I agree completely. And you're so right that when we're in those bad times, those dark times, we think that, geez, this is just going to be a constant downhill slope. But then maybe a few years pass, and we look at there's those bad times, the good times, and the good times are okay, but in hindsight, the good times are kind of boring, right?
Yeah.
The more interesting stuff was when the bad things happen, and we don't want all bad things to happen. But I mean, yeah, like even when I think back at when things were difficult for me, I mean, same exact sort of reaction, like when it was toughening me up for something that was better, or even when I thought things were good, they were okay. They were sort of blah, but it's like I had to go through maybe those rough patches to set myself up to really like get to the next level. And if I had found a way to time travel and avoid those bad moments, then it just would have been a blah, kind of uninteresting life. So in hindsight, in the perspective, like I'm glad that those bad things happened, and whether that was because it forced me to break out of my comfort zone or forced me to maybe take that inventory and cut out what wasn't working. I mean, yeah, I agree completely that those tough times kind of course correct us towards something that's even more amazing. And it's like we're never going to avoid the bad times. There's always going to be the ups and downs, but I mean, they're definitely not to be avoided.
No, and I think the other thing about the show as well, it proves the point that wherever you are in life, you've just had training to get you to that point. And literally anything you want to do from this moment on, you will look back and go, I already know how to do that. Because you've had those skills. For example, when I became a podcaster, I'd already learned how to podcast because I was a trainer, a financial trainer, and I'd learned how to use a microphone. I had no idea about podcasts. I had no idea there was a business around it. I had no idea at all, but I'd already learned how to do it. So when I decided, it was a pretty easy transition across. And I think anybody listening, if they've got an idea for a business, it's normally the case because they can see that they can already do it. And so you start doing it, you try to supply service to people, and then you're kind of up and running. But that's just the starting point. And then you pivot and you find different ways of doing it. And you realize that the first starting point was just what you thought was possible. But once you get into it, your peer group changes and you can see, blimey, there's a lot possible here, and you realize that you can have your cake and eat it. But it's all training. Everything puts us in the point where we are ready to go. We've just got to start.
Yes, I agree. And there's like these things evolve over time, and there are iterations, and they take on a life of its own. And once again, we don't even realize that this is a thing while we're in the middle of it. And for example, like I know a lot of voiceover people, and they got started by doing voiceovers, and that turned into podcasting. Or like I'm a computer programmer, and when I was younger, I had a 9-to-5 job, and I had to learn all these different things. And I thought to myself, well, this is sort of a waste of time. But then years later, all these skills that I picked up at this job fit in perfectly with my business, and in fact made me aware of opportunities or shortcuts or things I could do that I wouldn't even have known about if I hadn't had some of this on the job training. So I mean, I love that concept of we go through different, we kind of go through different lifetimes within our own lifetime, and we pick up different skills along the way. And maybe they're like customer service skills or business skills or whatever it is. We pick up skills in one job or one phase of our life that then carry over somewhere else, and we don't even realize it because we've kind of mastered it. So I mean, this is great stuff. And so you have this podcast, you have all these interesting guests on your podcast. So does anything come to mind as far as like the story or the kind of journey like this that blew you away or just really stands out for you?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, back in the day, I've done nearly 1,000 episodes now, but there was episode 82, and it always struck me. And there was a guy called Eric James, and we was having a sort of normal interview, and my style has changed very much. And just before the end, he started to tell me this story, and it literally has been life-changing. And the amount of times I've been in pubs and I go, look, I'll tell you this story. And in summary, he was a photographer, and he was taking pictures of trees and planes and stuff and just sort of enjoying himself. And he looked up at space one day and he thought, wouldn't it be amazing to take photographs of the Earth from space? And it was just one of those sort of throwaway comments. And so he was doing his job, and he happened to be on a plane flying back across America, one of these sort of short haul ones. And he picked up a brochure, and it was talking about Virgin Atlantic, and Virgin Atlantic was celebrating 15 years going into Miami. And he was reading this as interest, and he suddenly thought to himself, that's this weekend. They're celebrating it in Miami. I'm going to go there. And it was real sort of off the cuff. And so the plane landed, and he basically went over to the checkout and he got his money out, and he thought, right, the only thing that's going to be wasted is $200 for the flight, whatever. So he gets on a flight and he flies over, and he thinks, right, where's this happening? And he makes a few calls, and he finds it's done at like the Versace mansion or somewhere in Miami. So he manages to get to the door, and he blags his way in, as we say in the United Kingdom. He tells a few lies, and he manages to get through, and he's in a room, and he's waiting for Richard Branson to come in. And he said it was amazing because he knew that every single other person in there had done the same. They'd all managed to get in somehow. And so Richard Branson comes in, and he clocks them all. And he knows that they shouldn't be there. And for some reason, they've managed to get in. And he kind of liked that, apparently. You could see the spark in Richard's eyes because he's a bit of a maverick. So it goes around the room, and he's talking about different things. And he gets to this guy, Eric, and he says, what do you do? And he said, look, I'm a photographer. I tell you what, I've flown in here specially. I shouldn't be in this room, but I want to speak to you. I would really like to put myself forward as your space photographer. And Richard went, well, have you got any examples of your work? And he brings out his portfolio and shows him a few pictures. And Richard said, yeah, it looks good. He said, I'll be honest, I've already got a guy that I'm sort of lining up. He said, but I'll put you in contact with my receptionist or my PA, and we can see what we can do. Now, I've never actually found out whether he got up into space. But to me, that's not important. What takes my breath away every time I think about that is just by making bold decisions and creative decisions that could have left with egg on his face, he went from 8 billion people on this planet to a potential of 2. Now, that sends a message out to me for every single person out there that if you are just going with the masses, if you're trying to get a job in a bank, if you're trying to get a job in an insurance company, you've got less chance than trying to get into space because most people don't think it's possible, so they don't go there. And the more you make these bold decisions and move forward, you find the less competition until you find yourself in a shootout with just one other person, 50-50, flip a coin and you could win. And that is how I live my life from now on, Robert. Ever since I heard that, I'm not as bold as him in certain regards, but I always think to myself, the more that I do things my own way, the less competition, and I become a category of one. I think that story is amazing.
Yeah, I love it too. That is amazing. And so people who want to check that specific episode out, they go to joinupdots.com, find episode 82. Is that right?
Yeah, if you just go into Google and type in joinupdots 82, that one will come up.
Super great. And yeah, and there's so much good stuff in that quick story there, in that, first of all, like you ended it saying, be yourself. There's only one of you, right? Why be like everyone else? That sounds like a miserable existence. And the other thing is there's no downside in just taking a risk and asking. And think of how many people had that idea or a similar idea and just kind of shrugged it off and didn't do the crazy thing, didn't take any kind of action. And, we mentioned Steve Jobs a couple of times. It reminds me of, and I'm sure you've heard of it, like story like when Steve Jobs was a kid, he needed some part from Hewlett Packard or something.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
He went in the phone book and found the CEO of Hewlett Packard and called him, and he answered, and the guy sent him the part. And it's like everyone had access to that phone book. It was just Steve Jobs who made the thought to open the phone book, make the call, and just take the risk and see what happens. What's the downside? The worst that can happen is you hear no. So I mean, I love it. And so can you share with us any links or resources, URLs that you want to send people to after our great conversation today?
Well, we're actually redeveloping the website at the moment. So the website that you go over to it is a kind of, I've been hacked, and I thought to myself, do I spend time repairing it or just get a new one done? So it may change. But you can go over to joinupdots.com at Google, or you can also go over to my podcast training where I teach people how to get quite a large audience with minimum work, which is really important for businesses, at podcastersmastery.com. Other than that, you can just go onto Google and find me.
Awesome. Podcastersmastery.com to figure out how to do some work, but not a ton of work, and then get a bunch of traffic. And so, I mean, would you say that, is there something in your podcasting training that makes you stand out? I mean, since we're talking about standing out, is there a shtick or something special that makes your podcast training stand out from all the other stuff out there?
Yeah, I think what I have done, I worked a way out that you don't actually have to do any promotion. Long story short, the promotion almost killed me. When I started a podcast, I thought it was just recording and putting it out to the world. And then I realized I was doing promotional images and I was doing LinkedIn, I was doing all these kind of things. And it just took the fun away from it. So I realized that if you take the metrics that you manage to get from your podcast and you match it up with iTunes, you can pretty much program an ever increasing audience without having to do any work at all. So literally I will record a show and I will launch it and I will know what I'm going to get before it even launches due to these metrics that I've brought in.
Awesome. So that seems like that kind of adds to the confidence factor there, where, like if going in what your numbers are going to be and you can just publish it and everything else happens automatically, pretty great place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And once I worked this out, it took me about 2 years to work it out, all the algorithms. I literally went from 30,000 to 40,000 to 50,000 to 60,000. It just kept on going up. And then I sort of tried to break it and fine tune it and go again and stuff. So it's just, it's a wonderful place to be. I hardly ever have to podcast. So every time I do, I thoroughly enjoy it. And the audience is just coming to me. That is money in the bank because they're hot leads. If somebody's actually looking for you and they're coming to you, it's totally different than just forcing it on them like most podcasters do.
Right. I mean, amen to that. So great stuff. So everyone make sure you check out those two websites, joinupdots.com, or if the website's still a little under construction or hacked, just do a Google search for Join Up Dots. And then also, if you want to figure out how to make your podcast, how to make it work just like David, where it's minimum work, maximum results, then you owe it to yourself to go right now, run, don't walk, to podcastersmastery.com, and we'll see you there. So thanks, David, for stopping by and for sharing some of that British humor, some of the self-deprecation sort of stuff, and sharing some of these interesting stories and insights with us. I appreciate it. It's really great, really entertaining. So I'm sure everyone else listening appreciates it. So thank you very much.
I really appreciated being here, and thank you for everyone who's listened.
We really appreciate you listening to today's episode of Marketer of the Day. Subscribe to us on iTunes and rate and review us at marketeroftheday.com/iTunes.